This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The FBI provided an update today on the gunman who attempted to assassinate former President Trump last month. The Bureau also provided photos of the items recovered from the scene. They include Thomas Matthew Kursk's AR-15 rifle, his backpack, and the improvised explosive devices found in his car. Investigators say the 20-year-old became interested in explosives, major events, and political figures before the assassination attempt. The FBI says his online search history revealed a, quote, sustained, detailed effort to plan an attack on some event. The special agent in charge of the FBI's Pittsburgh field office says the Bureau still hasn't found a motive for why Kursk shot Trump during the July 13th campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. While Vice President Harris is in Georgia, former President Donald Trump is holding campaign events in battleground states this week, the very states that could decide the election. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has an update on Trump's campaign.
Former President Trump is holding campaign events this week in key battleground states. Now, nothing is scheduled for the former president, but his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, has two rallies today. He's speaking in Erie, Pennsylvania, and in De Pere, Wisconsin. Tomorrow, Trump is holding a town hall in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and on Friday, a rally in Johnsontown, Pennsylvania. Trump said he'll be attending the scheduled presidential debate hosted by ABC on September 10th in Philadelphia. He initially wanted to ensure the same rules as the debate with CNN with President Biden, rules including that candidates' microphones should be muted while the other is speaking, and they'll be standing and they cannot bring notes. RFK Jr., who recently dropped out of the presidential race and endorsed Trump, has pulled his name off the ballots in several states. He remains on the ballots in Michigan and Wisconsin, both of them swing states. Even though Kennedy tried to remove his name, state laws don't allow it. It'll be interesting to see if that actually impacts the votes. Now, this all comes as Trump's campaign added Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard to his presidential transition team. Gabbard is a former Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii who ran for president in 2020. And just yesterday, special counsel Jack Smith filed an updated indictment against former President Trump. This follows the Supreme Court's ruling that he enjoyed some presidential immunity from criminal prosecution. Prosecutors still allege that Trump tried to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. The only thing that changed is that the indictment removes allegations involving his interactions with the Justice Department. Now, immediately afterwards, Trump took to Truth Social, calling the indictment shocking and calling for its immediate dismissal. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz are campaigning in battleground Georgia. They're making up for a previously planned trip that was canceled due to Tropical Storm Debbie. NTD's Jason Blair has more from the highly sought-after swing state.
Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz started a two-day bus tour on Wednesday through South Georgia. It's scheduled to end with a rally in Savannah on Thursday, with Harris scheduled to speak.
We're certainly excited about it. The campaign has invested a lot of money and a lot of time, and of course, to have her come and spend a significant amount of time with us just after the convention speaks volumes to us.
Just a few months ago, some Democrats were voicing concern about winning the Peach State. However, the Harris-Walz campaign is showing that they still think it's a legitimate battleground.
She recognizes that Georgia is in play. The road to the White House goes through Georgia, and the lane to that road goes through Savannah and coastal Georgia.
You have to go there to win that state. Yeah. You have to drive up those numbers.
Harris's principal deputy campaign manager, Quentin Folks, told Playbook on Tuesday, you have to really stave down margins and go places even when you don't think you can win it outright. Current poll averages by Real Clear Politics are showing Trump winning Georgia by 1%. And before joining Harris in Georgia, Walz spoke Wednesday morning at the International Association of Firefighters Convention in Boston.
It was you who built the middle class. And we know that when unions are strong, America's strong.
And for the first time since starting their campaign, both Harris and Walz will sit down with CNN for their first formal interview with the press. It's scheduled to air on Thursday night. Reporting in Savannah, Georgia, Jason Blair, NTD News.
The Supreme Court today turned down the Biden administration's request to reinstate its student loan repayment plan. In a brief order, the High Court denied the administration's request to lift a lower court's injunction on the plan. It stated that it expected the Court of Appeals to make a decision within an appropriate time frame. The plan had been blocked by a lower court and a legal challenge brought by GOP-led states. Under the plan, borrowers would have their monthly payments slashed and the path to loan forgiveness fast-tracked. The order has no immediate impact on the 8 million borrowers currently enrolled in the plan. Israeli security forces began a counterterrorism operation across multiple cities in the West Bank. And in another development, a hostage who was rescued yesterday received a warm welcome before returning home. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
Smoke was seen rising in the West Bank on Wednesday as Israeli security forces conducted counterterrorism operations across multiple cities in the region. Palestinian officials said at least 10 people were killed in a major Israeli offensive in the West Bank. This man at a local hospital explained what happened after some young men asked him for water.
When I opened the door to give it to them in seconds, very fast, we felt like something came down on us from the sky, and there was an explosion. I was unaware of what is going on. When I put my hand on my chest, it was all shrapnel and in blood.
He then said 2 of his children were killed and 1 was injured. Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer gave an update on Wednesday.
Our IDF forces began this counter-terrorism operation in Jenin and Tulkarem. We are targeting armed terrorists from the air and the ground, dismantling explosives planted under the road and confiscating large quantities of weapons. We apprehended wanted suspects. We located and confiscated weapons, M16s, ammunition, and additional military equipment.
Meanwhile, a hostage who was rescued by Israeli forces on Tuesday received a warm welcome on Wednesday. Military officers, hospital staff, and family members filled the hallway and greeted him before he returned to his village where he spoke with reporters.
The place I was in, I do not wish this for anyone. So do everything you can. If it's demonstrations, everything to bring the people home from this side to the other, and from the other side to bring them back as well.
And he added this.
It doesn't matter if they are Muslims or, in the end, there's family, there's pain, there's children, mother and father. The pain is the same pain.
And in another development, Israel said on Wednesday that they recovered the body of a soldier in the Gaza Strip who was taken hostage on October 7th. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Fears of a possible nuclear disaster in Russia's Kursk region. The chief of the United Nations Nuclear Agency is at a power plant, saying strikes could seriously damage the station. That's as Russia declares that it's not planning to end the conflict anytime soon. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the war update.
Russia on Wednesday installing bomb shelters in the city of Kursk. More than 60 shelters will be installed at bus stations across town. Russia is still holding the city, but Ukraine says it now controls almost 500 square miles of the Kursk region, including 100 settlements. Local residents have been affected, with almost 200,000 having to evacuate.
Life changed unexpectedly, like in a dream, you know. Sometimes you even catch yourself thinking, is it really true? Could it really have happened? Well, it turns out that it did.
The fighting also puts a Russian local nuclear power plant at risk. The head of the United Nations Nuclear Agency visited the station on Wednesday, saying the reactor containing nuclear material is protected only by a roof.
This makes it extremely exposed and fragile, for example, to an artillery impact or a drone or a missile.
Russia said on Wednesday that its forces had defused an unexploded US-supplied cluster bomb. It was fired by Ukraine and shot down just 3 miles from the nuclear power plant. And fighting also continues in Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that its forces have seized a number of settlements in the Donetsk region. Ukraine, meanwhile, said that a Russian bomb killed a family of 4 in a small village in the region. President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday said that Russia also launched attacks on cities in the center of the country.
There was a strike with a guided aerial bomb on Kupiansk. Right in the city center, people were under the rubble. Unfortunately, there are fatalities.
On Tuesday, Zelensky said that he will present a plan to end the conflict to the US. The Kremlin responded on Wednesday.
We continue our special military operation and will achieve all the goals set.
He added that Russia doesn't plan to end the conflict. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
In France, authorities have issued preliminary charges against Telegram CEO Pavel Durov for allegedly allowing illegal activities on his social media platform. He's been released from custody on bail, but is not allowed to leave France. Durov was arrested on Saturday at a Paris airport as part of an investigation that opened last month. Russia-born Durov is also a French citizen. Allegations against him include allowing his platform to be used in connection with child sexual abuse, drug trafficking, fraud, and organized criminal activities. French prosecutors also allege that Telegram refused to share information or documents with investigators when required by law. French media AFP reports that Durov is also under investigation for, quote, serious violence against one of his children in Paris. A January 6th defendant has been sentenced to 5 years in prison. Federal prosecutors say he planned the Capitol breach with other members of the Oath Keepers weeks prior. 48-year-old Dan Edwin Wilson of Kentucky pleaded guilty in May to conspiring to impede or injure police officers. He told the judge that he regrets entering the Capitol that day, but got involved with good intentions. Prosecutors say Wilson has identified as an Oath Keeper a member of the Grey Ghost Partisan Rangers, a 3%er militia. They say he communicated with other members of the group as he marched to the Capitol. Wilson is among over 1,400 people charged with federal crimes over January 6th. Around 950 of them have been convicted and sentenced. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are reacting after special counsel Jack Smith filed a superseding indictment against former President Trump in the January 6th case. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on what they are saying.
Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin called the superseding indictment against former President Donald Trump heroic.
And I think there's something quietly heroic about Jack Smith insisting on going forward to make sure that this plot come to light. Donald Trump tried to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. So Jack Smith is trying to make the law work in the way it was intended to.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson posted on social media that Donald Trump continues to be the most persecuted politician in the history of the U.S. Speaker Johnson added that special counsel Jack Smith has brought yet another bogus indictment and that Americans are sick of his corruption and shameless lawfare. Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren from California aimed her criticism at the Supreme Court's ruling last month on presidential immunity and blamed former President Donald Trump for the events of January 6th.
Supreme Court made really a radical decision granting Trump immunity, a bizarre case. The judge has to have an evidentiary hearing to find out what is the evidence supporting this slimmed down indictment. But I mean, one thing is abundantly clear. The former president summoned a mob to Washington.
Senator and Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance defended the Supreme Court's ruling regarding presidential immunity and dismissed the superseding indictment against former President Donald Trump as election interference.
And you know, the way that I think about it is try to make this nonpartisan. Barack Obama ordered drones to strike an American citizen in Yemen. That's like the definition of murder, unless you recognize the president has some immunity in conducting his official acts.
It is important to note that despite criticism against special counsel investigations against former President Donald Trump, House Republican leadership has decided not to pursue the strategy of defunding the Department of Justice through the appropriations process. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Earlier, we spoke with Zach Smith, senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation and former federal prosecutor, about the superseding indictment. Zach Smith, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Now, to begin, what changes were made to this newest indictment? The original 4 charges haven't changed, so what's different here?
Yeah, this is a little bit of an unusual situation for a superseding indictment. A superseding indictment typically means that prosecutors are adding additional charges against a defendant, but that's not what Jack Smith did in this case. As you mentioned, Jack Smith left the 4 original charges intact, but he essentially changed the factual predicates underlying those charges. For instance, he removed references to Donald Trump's conversations with Justice Department officials in the wake of the 2020 election. He added some language to make clear that in his view, certain actions Donald Trump took in his private or political capacities rather than in his official capacity. And he also added some additional language relevant to some of the other charges, again, trying to emphasize that those were private rather than official acts. And the reason Jack Smith took these actions, the reason he made these amendments, is to try to get around the immunity ruling that the U.S. Supreme Court recently released, where the court said that presidents, including Donald Trump, are immune from prosecution for acts they take in their official capacity while in office.
On that note, when it comes to this wording, if you will, that was changed by turning Trump into a presidential candidate versus the president at the time that these actions took place, is that enough to meet the test set forth by the Supreme Court's immunity ruling?
Well, that's what Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's overseeing this D.C. trial, will have to decide. What is interesting, as I mentioned, Jack Smith removed references to the conversations with Justice Department officials, but he left in the allegations about Donald Trump's conversations with Vice President Mike Pence about whether or not Pence had the power to refuse to certify the electoral results. And the reason Jack Smith left that in is the Supreme Court said that presidents may enjoy presumptive immunity for those types of conversations, but that would have to be something that the lower courts decide, given the fact-intensive nature of those conversations and questions. And so it'll be interesting to watch and see what Judge Chutkan does in this case. She has a hearing currently set for September 5th, and so we may get a better idea of what she will do at that hearing.
And in your view, what do these changes to this latest indictment mean for Trump?
Well, in terms of timing, I certainly don't think it changes much. There's almost no possibility that this case or the other cases against Donald Trump will be resolved before the upcoming election in November. I do think Jack Smith's full speed ahead approach is unfortunate in some respects because it gives a political gloss or the appearance of a political gloss to some of these actions, which is not what we should expect from Justice Department officials. But when you view this in conjunction with a brief he filed in the classified documents case, urging the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn Judge Eileen Cannon's dismissal of his indictment against Donald Trump in that case, it certainly looks like Jack Smith and his special counsel's office are intending to try to move these prosecutions along as quickly as possible.
Now, expanding on that, Trump has already pleaded not guilty to all of these charges in the past. Where do you see this case in particular going from here?
Well, I think Judge Chutkan is going to have to resolve these immunity issues, these immunity questions, really at the outset in determining whether Jack Smith's amendments are sufficient to avoid the issues flagged by the U.S. Supreme Court in that United States versus Trump ruling. It will be interesting to watch and see whether Trump's legal team raises questions about whether special counsel Jack Smith has been constitutionally appointed. That's the grounds on which Judge Eileen Cannon dismissed the classified documents indictment against Donald Trump. That issue hasn't been brought forward in this D.C. case against Donald Trump. The case law in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is much more favorable to Jack Smith. And so depending on what the 11th Circuit decides, depending on what Judge Chutkan decides, it could potentially tee up Jack Smith's appointment, whether or not it was constitutional, for review by the U.S. Supreme Court.
And zooming out a bit, Zach, how do you see this case shaping up against the other cases against Trump?
Well, this case is certainly moving along with the other cases. Obviously, the state court prosecution by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is the furthest along. In that case, Donald Trump was actually convicted of numerous charges. Now, there are many appellate issues that Trump is likely to raise on appeal. And frankly, I think he has many good appellate issues in that case, meaning there's a good chance that those convictions could be reversed. But right now, Judge Juan Merchan, who is overseeing that case, has to decide whether to move forward with sentencing proposing are to delay that sentencing until a later date. But again, I think it's unlikely any of the cases against Donald Trump are going to be resolved before the election in November.
Zach Smith, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Countries in the Indo-Pacific region have partnered with the United States for more than 200 years. Through trade and exchange, all nations have prospered and grown. But China's increasingly assertive behavior in the region has created numerous challenges for the U.S. NTD's Arlene Richards explores how the two presidential candidates view these challenges.
The United States has been what the State Department calls an Indo-Pacific nation for centuries. U.S. engagement in the region marks a history of trade, exchange, shared sacrifice, and mutual benefit. According to the State Department, the region is home to more than half the world's population, and it accounts for 60% of global GDP, as well as 2/3 of global economic growth. In 2019, $1.9 trillion worth of U.S. trade passed through the region. But for decades, Beijing has challenged the status quo and the rule of law, asserting sovereignty in the South China Sea, despite an international court rejecting Beijing's claims in 2016. The Trump and Biden administrations have called out China for its human rights abuses against Muslim minority groups in Xinjiang and its provocations toward Taiwan and other countries in the East and South China Sea. Both administrations have touted their commitments to Pacific Island nations. During his administration, former President Trump outlined a goal for promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific at a time when China's presence across the region was growing. He shared his vision at the 2017 APEC summit in Vietnam.
Today, I am here to offer renewed partnership with America, to work together to strengthen the bonds of friendship and commerce between all of the nations of the Indo-Pacific. What the countries and economies represented here today have built in this part of the world is nothing short of miraculous.
A document declassified at the end of Trump's term details his framework for the region. The framework recognized the challenges from China to the Indo-Pacific nation's sovereignty. Vice President Kamala Harris has personally spoken on behalf of the Biden administration. In a virtual address to the Pacific Islands Forum in 2022, Harris vowed to improve Washington's diplomatic attention there.
The United States is a proud Pacific nation and has an enduring commitment to the Pacific Islands, which is why President Joe Biden and I seek to strengthen our partnership with you. The United States will launch the process to establish 2 new embassies in the region.
In separate remarks during a speech in Japan, Harris called out China for its behavior in the East and South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. The candidates are not exactly in agreement about defending Taiwan.
We will continue to support Taiwan's self-defense, consistent with our long-standing policy. And the United States will continue to deepen our unofficial ties.
Should the U.S. help defend Taiwan if it means going to war with China?
Well, I don't want to say it because if I'm in the position of president, I don't want to say what I'm thinking. You know, if I answer that question, it'll put me in a very bad negotiating position.
Trump said Taiwan took all of America's chip business and the U.S. should have stopped it. Both administrations agree on one issue.
On Taiwan, I reiterated the long-standing U.S. One China policy. That policy has not changed. It's guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances.
The One China policy doesn't view Taiwan as an independent sovereignty. The U.S. stance acknowledges that China claims the island but doesn't recognize it. As president, Trump wavered on his support for the One China policy, but ultimately he supported it. At times, he used his support of the policy as a bargaining tool in the U.S.-China trade war. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
President Biden's top aide, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, is in Beijing for the second day of meetings with top Chinese officials. China's foreign ministry said that Sullivan and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi discussed setting up new talks between Biden and Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. Both sides also agreed to host a video conference between their military theater commanders. Washington has stressed the significance of keeping open talks between the U.S. and Chinese militaries to prevent future conflicts in areas like the Taiwan Strait. Wang also raised Beijing's disapproval of U.S. tariffs on a wide range of China-made goods, as well as U.S. export restrictions targeting Chinese chip makers. Sullivan's trip aims to ease tensions between the U.S. and China ahead of the November U.S. election. On the final day of meetings tomorrow, the two sides are expected to discuss more topics where the two countries are at odds, like China's claims over Taiwan and in the South China Sea. For more in-depth news from China and analysis on what it means for the West, stay tuned for China in Focus tonight on NTD. 4 U.S. internet providers come under attack from Chinese hackers. More details on how they found their way in and how the group behind the hack has been plaguing American tech for years. That's tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on China in Focus. Britain and Germany's leaders agreed to work on an ambitious treaty to reset British relations with the European Union. The UK's recently elected Prime Minister Keir Starmer has put improved ties at the heart of his efforts to boost Britain's economic growth. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson is in London.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is seeking to reset relations with the European Union as he meets in Berlin with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The two leaders have agreed to work on a treaty covering issues from defence to trade.
I'm absolutely clear that we do want a reset. I've been able to repeat that here today, a reset with Europe, a reset with the EU. That does not mean reversing Brexit or re-entering the single market or the customs union.
Scholz said Germany wanted to take this outstretched hand.
The United Kingdom has always been an indispensable part of the solution to the major issues affecting the whole of Europe. This has not changed since the UK left the European Union.
The new cooperation treaty would deepen collaboration in science, technology, business and culture while increasing trade. Britain and Germany said they hoped to sign the cooperation treaty by early next year.
At the heart of this treaty will be a new defence agreement, an agreement that builds upon our already formidable defence cooperation.
The deepening defence cooperation comes ahead of a possible scaling back of US support for NATO if former President Donald Trump returns to the White House early next year. Trump has said he would not defend allies if they do not increase their defence budgets. Starmer also highlighted cooperation on the shared European challenge of illegal immigration. The issue is a hot topic in Germany at the moment following a knife attack in Solingen that killed 3 people and wounded 8 more, allegedly carried out by a suspected Islamic extremist from Syria. Starmer reiterated his plan to tackle the people smuggling gangs behind the UK's small boat crisis, which charge migrants thousands of dollars to cross the sea from France to Britain. He suggested the joint action plan could involve authorities intercepting boats in transit across Europe to stop them reaching the northern French coast. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Oppressive heat continues to broil people in more than half a dozen states. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports on ways they are trying to beat the heat as temperatures approach triple digits.
The National Weather Service has issued excessive heat warnings and advisories for today in multiple areas. Cities in many states have opened cooling centers in response, including Chicago, where temperatures were expected to close in on 100 degrees. Members of St. Sabina Catholic Church on Chicago's South Side collected over 4,000 bottles of water as temperatures climbed.
We are giving water to people in the community. We're blessing people with water because it is a very hot day.
It's not just people who are feeling the heat.
People think animals are adapted to weather extremes like heat because they come from more tropical areas, but they're really Chicagoans just like us and they experience the same weather we do.
The zoo monitors the animals for heat distress.
We provide ice treats for chimpanzees, and it has the same kind of effect as what you would give like a popsicle to a person. It's cool, it gets them drinking more.
Dr. Tom Brozick says heat distress begins with vague symptoms like a headache or feeling tired.
But it can soon escalate into more serious side effects such as confusion, not remembering where you are, and what you've been doing through the day.
People visiting the Minnesota State Fair sought relief from soaring temperatures under misters. Others used fans.
We thought it was definitely a must to get these fans for today, and they are definitely helping along with these.
Pretty sticky, but when the clouds go in front of the sun and you get a little shade, or you can hide around a building, it's actually okay.
Firefighters had to cut rings off 2 people's fingers after they became swollen from the heat and salty fair food. The heat forced many schools to end the class day early or close altogether. In Pennsylvania, over 60 schools in Philadelphia dismissed students early due to the excessive heat. Schools in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Iowa have also experienced closures or early dismissal. The National Weather Service says much higher than average temperatures will continue over the next few days across a large portion of the nation. Many areas will see high temperatures 10 to 15 degrees above average. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
A California proposal could make illegal immigrants eligible for housing aid. People could get up to $150,000 in loans to help buy a home paid for by the state. NTD's David Lamb reports.
The new proposal would expand home buying loans to illegal immigrants. On Tuesday, the Senate passed the bill in a 25-14 vote. California's Home Purchase Assistance Program would cover up to a 20% down payment or closing costs, capped at $150,000. It's called Assembly Bill 1840, which was introduced by Assemblyman Joaquin Arambula, and it prevents the state's Home Purchase Assistance Program from disqualifying an applicant based on their immigration status. Applicants would need to be first-time homebuyers, and at least one borrower needs to be a first-generation homebuyer, such as someone whose parents don't own a home or they've been through foster care. The homebuyer would have to repay the down payment loan, plus a portion of the profits if the house is sold later on. So that's the increased value of the home. Now, as of Wednesday, it's in the Assembly before going to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. David Lamb, NTD News.
Video game actors have remained on strike since July. This follows months of negotiations with major gaming companies. The strike aims to ensure equal protection for union voice actors and motion capture performers against what they say is unregulated use of artificial intelligence. NTD's Christina Corona reports from Southern California.
We're here in the city of Burbank outside Warner Brothers Studios, where members of Sag-Aftra are picketing as part of their strike against major video game studios.
When do we want it? When do we want it? When do we want it?
The video game companies are rightly isolated. When you look at the studios, the streamers, the record labels, we've been able to achieve the necessary protections for our members with all of those companies, and yet for some reason the video game companies refuse to make the same fair deal.
Several video game actors and voice actors said they are striking for fair contracts, primarily to oppose unregulated use of artificial intelligence.
Something where we know that we have something in writing that when we go in to do one session, that doesn't mean they can just digitally reproduce our voice for future needs. It's ensuring that we can still do what we love to do for people in moving forward, and we're not phased out by robots.
Voice actor Sam Quasman mentioned many actors have worked their entire career for only a modest return.
We're fighting for our lives, basically. I mean, we spend all this time learning our lines and taking acting lessons, singing lessons, dancing. I mean, you train for your career, and then you wind up with a couple $100.
One voice actor raised concerns that AI is costing them jobs, as AI-generated voices can be manipulated to say inappropriate or offensive things, which then are falsely attributed to them, causing issues with their agencies.
And the actors over here are like, no, wait, that was not me. Someone cloned my voice through some program, and like, I would never say any of this stuff. So the AI protections are definitely what is worth fighting for livelihoods. AI is not coming. It's already here. So what we're fighting for is at the very least hard legal protections, so that way we don't get screwed over.
Video game actors, union voice actors, and motion capture performers have been on strike since July 25th. Video game actors first hit the picket line a year after Hollywood actors and writers wrapped up their historic strikes that lasted 118 days. Reporting from the city of Burbank, Christina Corona, NTD News.
SpaceX's historic Polaris Dawn mission is delayed once again. This time it's because of bad weather. 4 private astronauts were set to be launched into space this morning, but SpaceX said bad offshore weather is predicted in the area where the crew will eventually splash down at the end of the mission. During the mission, SpaceX plans to conduct the first ever private spacewalk, as well as gather data from dozens of experiments. The mission commander said the crew must be absolutely sure of re-entry weather before launching. That's because the supplies they are carrying are limited. The mission had already been postponed from yesterday after engineers discovered a helium leak in one of the rocket's components. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty to discuss today, but let's start in college football as the NCAA is proposing eliminating the spring transfer window, meaning players would only be able to transfer during the winter period. Was there a reason given for this proposal?
Well, they cited, quote, roster stability for student athletes in their programs. I mean, I think that kind of translates to coaches wanting players to stay for their own stability, of course. You know, I mean, with the ability to transfer without having to redshirt now, combined with the new name, image, likeness payments they can get, everyone is transferring. 2,700 transfers happened last year. That was a school year record. And though it really works both ways, players can come, they can go. I'm sure coaches probably had a level of frustration, not even knowing in April what team they would have come August when the season starts. Now, you mentioned there's a 30-day period in December when they can transfer as well, which is right after the regular season ends. The spring transfer period window is a 15-day window, pretty much right after spring practices are ending, where players can see where they're on their depth chart. That's the one possibly being eliminated. That'll be decided, though, this October.
Moving to tennis news, last night we had quite a duel on the men's side, resulting in the longest ever match in event history at more than 5.5 hours. Now, would you normally expect something like this to happen in the first round?
No, you'd really expect it in the later rounds when the best players are presumably playing the best players. This was Daniel Evans and Karan Khachanov yesterday, an incredible match. 5 hours, 35 minutes. 3 of the 5 sets went to a tiebreaker. Each set took longer than an hour, and even the finish. Evans fell behind 4-0 in the 5th set, roared back to win the final 6 games. Even the final point, a 22-shot rally, was really incredible. Now tonight at the U.S. Open, I'm not expecting any more 5.5-hour marathons, but we do have some stars in action in the second round. You've got Novak Djokovic is going to be playing at 8:30, and reigning women's champion Coco Gauff. She'll be starting very soon, 7 p.m. here.
Looking at the NFL, the Pittsburgh Steelers have announced that free agent signee Russell Wilson will be their starting quarterback over Justin Fields. Was this considered a surprise?
I mean, not really. Fields is a decade younger, but he's got a lot of promise. Wilson, until 2 years ago, was considered one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Then he got traded from Seattle to Denver, and he really never got going there. Even bringing Sean Payton last year didn't seem to really help, which really surprised me. But he's got that track record, 9 Pro Bowl appearances. I think they can get him back to that level. I mean, he's 35. That's not that old for a quarterback. Meanwhile, I think they're hoping they can develop Fields behind him. Now, elsewhere in the league, the Dallas Cowboys will sign running back Dalvin Cook to their practice squad. That's according to a report by ESPN. That gives them a very experienced backfield with him and Ezekiel Elliott. Meanwhile, in New England, they've yet to announce who their starting quarterback is going to be. It's going to be down to Jacoby Brissett and rookie Drake May. It looks like they will finally announce that soon, though.
Well, elsewhere in the league, the owners have approved private equity ownership of their franchises, but have limited it to 10%. Now, this has been popular in other leagues. Why do you think it took so long for the NFL to follow this?
You know, I'm not sure the entire reason for this delay. I mean, it's been years. I do think they like how some individual families have owned the same teams for years, right? You think of the Rooney family owning the Pittsburgh Steelers for all these years, the Hunt family owning the Kansas City Chiefs. I think there's a little bit of pride in that. But as you said, this is now commonplace among many other sports leagues. I'm sure part of what has pushed this change is how valuable and thus how expensive these franchises are. I mean, Sportico just listed the Dallas Cowboys at worth more than $10 billion earlier this month. The average franchise is worth nearly $6 billion. If you're looking to buy one of these teams, putting together that kind of money just from individual owners, it's getting more and more difficult the more money you have to put together. Now, only 4 investment groups have actually been approved by the league for ownership. I'm sure that number will soon rise, though.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.